Hello to everyone. Welcome. If you are not one of our speakers tonight, we just ask that you keep your audio and video off just because it can get a little distracting. But thank you everyone for joining us. All right, and we can get started here. So, my name is Olivia. I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books. For those of you who don't know, Belmont Books is an independently owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts, and we've been bringing books to the community since 2016. Before we begin, I'd like to let you guys know just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a number of excellent events coming up. They are all virtual as of now. On September 29th, we are joined by Jeff Benedict in conversation with Tom Curran about Jeff's book, The Dynasty. You can register for all of our future events, including the upcoming October ones, on our website, belmontbooks.com. And that's also where you can purchase tonight's book, Entanglements. All right, and everyone seems to be following the rules with no audio and visual, which is great. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. I'll be poking through, and comments, questions, conversations, all welcome, but I will only be asking questions at the end. I am very excited to announce everyone tonight. Sheila Williams, Jim Kelly, and Suzanne Palmer are all here with us today. Sheila is the multiple Hugo Award-winning editor of Asimov's science fiction magazine and the editor of co-editor of more than 24 anthologies. Jim writes a column on the internet for Asimov's science fiction magazine. He has won the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards. He has written several novels and contributed to collections, has published over 100 stories, and his fiction has been translated into 18 languages. Suzanne has been nominated for the Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award and the Eugene M. Foster Award. She has won readers' polls for best stories from Asimov's, Analog, and Interzone. She is the author of the Finders Chronicles. With that, I'll turn it over to our readers. Thank you again to everyone who has joined us, and have fun.
So who's going to go first here?
You invited us, Sheila. What's going on here?
Thank you. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi.
So I guess we could start with Jim, since you popped up first. Would you like to read a story?
Sure. All right.
Just a short bit.
I have a short bit to read. And so I'll say a little bit about can I talk about the anthology first? Hey, we got some time to fill. So, So this is a great opportunity. I've been following the 12 Tomorrows series for a while and have been kind of wondering when I would get my chance to contribute. So when it turns out my really good friend Sheila was editor and she invited me to submit, I was really psyched. So I wanted to turn in some of the material. But MIT also is kind of intimidating. I wrote a story about my story is about robotics and AI. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. What if somebody who actually knows about robotics and AI reads my story? I hope it passes muster. So I had been thinking for a while. I mean, I've actually written several stories which are exploring a subgenre, a trope of science fiction that makes some people uncomfortable. I've been thinking hard about sex bots, and the reason I've been thinking about them is just because every time I go on the internet, there is some weird and interesting new twist on this whole bot and sex bot thing. So my story, let me go to my page where I have it out. I can introduce it. So my story is called Your Boyfriend Experience, and the scene I'm going to read takes place about a third of the way into this novelette. The main action of the story is a date between Dak, who is a man who is a gourmet cook, and Tate, who is a playbot. So the playbot industry arises 20, 30, maybe sooner years from now out of the sexbot industry, but Tate is a very advanced prototype. He is indistinguishable from a human man. And he's designed not only for sex, I mean, yeah, that was where they came from, sexual gratification, but also for emotional and psychological fulfillment as well. So the Tate model is supposed to give his owner the, quotes, boyfriend experience, hence the title. Tate, the bot, was designed by Dak's boyfriend rather, who asked Dak to field test his new creation, this playbot, take it out in public and to see if anyone will notice that it's a playbot, because up until now, the battery situation meant that these bots could never really go far from home. And so Tate is out in the wild, so to speak, and the company that Dak's boyfriend works for and is very interested in whether he could pass. So at this point in the story, in the date, they're about to enter the fanciest, most expensive restaurant in the city, kind of snooty, which I hope will come across. But it really excites our narrator, Dak, because he's a gourmet cook and he might get to meet his hero, the famous Sofia Vasquez. And so it starts like this, the scene starts like this. Stage left was on the top floor of the Turnbull Tower with a view of the river. An express elevator opened onto a long interior hallway. On one wall were windows overlooking the busy kitchen stations. The maitre d'hotel stood at the far end. We kept him waiting because I held Tate to a slow walk. In the kinds of restaurants I could afford, bots did prep and cleanup. But as I browsed the window wall, I saw only human staff. I watched the line chefs and kitchen hands at work. They had some of the same microplanes, jacquards, and frothers I used in my own kitchen, but the cultured meat processors and carb brewing tanks were beyond anything I could afford. I don't see Sofia Vasquez, I murmured. Who's that? The chef de cuisine, also the food host on Style Life. Looks like her sous chef is running the kitchen tonight. Is that bad? No, but she's the brand name here. I glanced at Tate and laughed. Go ahead and judge, I said. I'm not ashamed of my celebrity crushes. Crushes? How many do you have? Slow down, pal, I said. It's only the first date. I nodded at the maitre d'. Reservation for Delaney. Welcome to stage left, gentlemen. His eyes flicked from me to Tate. Could he tell that Tate was a playbot? This way. My first impression of the dining room was of a vast and empty space filled with pastel light. But it wasn't empty. 20 or so tables were set against the two side walls, little stages lit by an array of spotlights. The back wall was a single window that looked at the glimmering city and its black river. The decor was all sharp edges and hard surfaces, tables of brushed aluminum, chairs made of rectangular slabs of glass. The tables were extravagantly spaced. The restaurant could have accommodated 3 times as many diners. Those who'd arrived before us were scattered so far apart that we heard none of the usual dining gabble. Or maybe they were hushed out of reverence for the conspicuous privilege on display. At the center of the stage was a low dais on which plates of exotic food and glasses of mysterious drink appeared as if beamed in from the 23rd century. We were shown to our table. I've chosen Kylie to be your server tonight, said the maitre d', beckoning to a line of waitstaff standing at attention. Excuse me, said Tate, but will the boss be in at some point? I grimaced. It was a question I might have asked myself had it been bold enough, but where was the respect? Sofia Vasquez was the chef de cuisine of the finest restaurant in the city. It is the chef's custom to arrive around 8. The maitre d' made no attempt to hide his disdain for Tate's word choice. So, yes, sir, momentarily. Tate grinned at me. I only asked because Mr. Delaney here is a fan. Ah, the maitre d' tugged at his lab coat, although it didn't need adjusting. As so many are. Enjoy your meal, gentlemen. He returned to his station. The boss, I said. Where did that come from? Your drug algorithm? He snickered. Well, that's what she is. This isn't some pizza joint. I wagged a finger at him. It's culinary theater. We all need to act our parts. In that case, that guy is a ham, even worse than last time. I leaned back in my chair. You've been here before? He unfolded his napkin and smiled. Before I could digest this, our server arrived, all grins and goodwill in her sky blue lab coat. Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Kylie, and I will be your guide to the gastronomical arts of Sofia Vasquez. Tate covered a laugh with a cough. Is this your first visit to stage left? Yes, I said. Tate gave her a sly finger wave. Second. So that's me. More hijinks, more culinary hijinks are to follow.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks so much. I guess I should have said at the beginning of this, before Jim got started, that Entanglements, as everyone has been saying, it's part of the 12 Tomorrows series that MIT has published. It's a 6th volume in the series, but it's also the first volume that has a theme. And the theme of this anthology is tomorrow's lovers, families, and friends. And it's about the effect of today's emerging technologies on these relationships. So all the stories in this book have to do with one sort or another of relationships. It's not necessarily human, as in Jim's case, but all relationships and how they're affected by technology.
Well, let me ask Sheila. Let me ask you a question. Well, actually, let you toot your own horn. So when Sheila got this gig, she actually called me up and said, "Ooh, sounds really good. I should do this, right?" And I said, "Absolutely." So she explained what the idea of it was, the theme of it was. And so we all went assiduously to work on writing our stories. And a little bit later, maybe when the stories started coming in, somebody I know came up with this title, which was her own idea that had nothing to do with MIT. So who was that, Sheila? And could you tell us how you came up with that brilliant title?
Well, MIT asked me to come up with a title, which actually surprised me because I had been just thinking 12 tomorrows, and suddenly it was, oh, what would you like to call this? And so I actually went through about 40 years of poetry, looking through poetry, and also, but out of physics, the whole concept of entanglement in physics, and I thought that worked so well with relationships. And when I say went through 40 years of poetry, it was science fiction poetry, not just anybody's poetry. But it all came together to me that it had the entanglements pulled the science and technology and the human relationships together, and sounded kind of a little like very intriguing to me as well. So that's where the title came from, and I was pretty happy with it. And then the title of the book kind of evolved. It's still part of 12 Tomorrows, but the title's changed a bit so that it's not as where 12 Tomorrows becomes more of that it's part of the series as opposed to part of the title. So to read from your story.
Sure. And I do want to make a few comments about this, but I'm actually going to do it after I read, because even though I'm only going to read a little part of it, it would be slightly spoilery. So, and also not make sense. So, my story is called Don't Mind Me. Anybody who's read any of my stuff knows that I usually write fairly far future space opera, science fiction. That's really kind of my usual bailiwick. So this was a great challenge to try to write something that was, more relevant to the immediate times. And I have children, and part of being a parent is navigating school systems and the effect other parents have on the policies of school systems and the education, and what texts are problematic versus, considered safe. And I don't always find myself in agreement with people. But unfortunately, I live in a really great liberal hippie town. We have an actual commune that's been running since the 60s that's still in town. And my first week in town, there was a guy who was riding his unicycle up and down my remote mountainous road, not wearing any clothes. So that tells you a lot about the sort of place where I live, and that's totally a tangent. But anyhow, so this was me thinking about kids and education and parents and sort of the future of where some of these conflicts between parents and schools and kids might go. The main character is a kid named Jake. He's in high school, and I will pick it up as he's just been invited by the most popular girl in school to participate in their after-school science lab cleanup for extra credit, and he's not entirely sure why they invited him. So I will start from there. Jake, Riley said. Hi, he said. Where's Mrs. Scott? She trusts us to get through the checklist and not cause trouble, Riley said. We've been doing this all year for her. She'll come by after the late bell and lock up. Okay, Jake said. What do you want me to do? Come help with the glassware, Kit said, unless you're clumsy. Not too much, he said. He shrugged off his backpack, dumped it on a stool, and went back to the sink. You guys do this every week? Tuesdays and Thursdays, Nate said. We all need the extra credit to fill in the gaps, you know? Not me, Jonathan said, as his pile of magnets that he was playing with fell over. Earlier scene. My brain is my own, and my grades are too. I just rather hang out with these loons than have to go home. Ever since freshman year, the five of them, Riley, Jonathan, Kit, Aaron, and Nate, had been best friends, a perfectly self-contained, self-sufficient social circle. The oddness of them inviting him here struck him again, and he lost track of which drawer he'd last returned pipettes to. But why me, though? He asked. A few months ago, Harris and Deke were bugging my little sister Lynn in the lunchroom, calling her fat and four eyes and spaz, Aaron said. You stepped in and threatened to beat their asses if they'd ever spoke to her again. Oh, yeah. Jake hadn't known the two of them were related, though now that he thought about it, the resemblance between the two dark-haired girls was obvious. Harris and Deke are jerks. Anyone would know. Anyone would have done the same. No, Aaron said. No one had all year. Until you. Jake shrugged. I'm big. Everyone thinks that must mean I throw a hard punch and like to fight. Doesn't matter that I've never hit someone in my life. He almost had once, and that had been close enough. Yeah, well, I'm glad you were there, Aaron said. Behind them, Nate got up and shut the classroom door and leaned against it. What? Jake started to ask, but Riley put her finger to her lips, then pointed at Jonathan. Anyhow, I'll stop there, but I don't know if that was a good teaser bit, but the kids are all, or some of the kids are wearing these things called minders that are actually attached to their head and have an implant that when they hear words or things that their parents don't think they should hear, actually zaps their short-term memory retention so they miss it, and they have censored textbooks. So they go to class, and if it's a class where there's a lot of stuff their parents don't like, they walk out of class with huge gaps in their memories. And obviously this is challenging for any kid trying to actually learn. Interestingly, shortly after I had sent this story into Sheila, which I did from somewhere in the middle of Tennessee while driving across the United States last year, I work at Smith College as a Linux system administrator, and one of our faculty members in computer science likes to come over and show me all the cool new gizmos that he's got. There is a lot of advantage of making friends with a whole bunch of scientists and having them want you to fix things for you, because they also know you will appreciate when they go show you the cool technology. So like the astronomers drag me up on the roof to like, hey, you want to go see the transit of Mercury? It's like, well, okay, you know, and the physics department is like, want to come try our bed of nails? And I was like, okay, right? So my computer science guy brought over, and it's a pair of goggles that, and this actually exists in real life, that you can wear where you can select people in your view in front of you and block them out. And this is meant for people who have problems with public speaking, who get distracted by the audience, where you can just put basically a big gray box over anybody in your field of vision and block them out that way. Of course, it was, very new, and if the person moved a lot, the box had trouble keeping up with them and stuff like that. But the technology is really there, and then there's the implications of what if you said, okay, we're gonna force our kids to wear technology like this, and we don't want them to see any Black people. So there's significant ethical considerations about nearly everything. Anyhow, that's what my story is about, and I hope that was a good little excerpt to get you like, oh, what are they up to? What's the cool kids doing with Jake? So.
I think that was a great excerpt. I think personally, there's a lot of all the stories in this book are filled with amazing ideas, an amazing use of technology, and I have a story from Nancy Kress, Invisible People, which is about genetic engineering, or genetically changing a fetus, and I have a story by Mediation by Cadwell Turnbull that has an AI sort of family counselor, and has a lot of plant biology going on in the story. The stories are just filled with technology and science, and I love that, but they're still very human. They're still very much about people and the human relationships, and that is really what all fiction is really stories about people, even if they are set on spaceships, or even if they are in the far future or in the distant past or whatever, they're still about people. I thought I'd read a brief excerpt from a story by Mary Robinette Kowal called A Little Wisdom, and it's set not too far in the future, but where people have electronic, right now we have guide dogs, but we also have animals, dogs that can be trained to help out people who have Parkinson's and other conditions. And this is I don't know if this will come across in the excerpt, but this is an excerpt from her story, and here we go. Gail turned from the outer door to face the room full of people. Her feet moved smoothly as if she were just an old lady with a robot dog. All right, everyone, we're okay. I know that was frightening, but the building is over 100 and the room plunged into darkness. Upstairs, glass shattered. More than one person screamed. Their voices sucked into the wind that kicked around them. Gail froze, but it had nothing to do with Parkinson's. Her heart felt as if it were trying to squeeze out through her pores. The map of the tornado was frozen with it just over the Parthenon, and in the corner of the image, an offline icon flashed. She swallowed, reached for her e-dog's handle, and he was right where he was supposed to be. Wilbur, light, please. Light glowed from his eyes, and in violet racing stripes along his sides and legs. It gave the room the eerie look of a nightclub suspended between songs. A moment later, an older voice matched her own. Bilbo, light, please. Across the room, another robot dog glowed into shimmering blue existence. Issa's, light, please. A golden emu emerged from the dark. One after another, service robots lit the dark with a full spectrum. The people that the lights illuminated huddled with their hands laced over the backs of their necks or with hoodies drawn protectively over their face and eyes. Some of them rocked in place. Others held perfectly still as if they might attract the notice of the storm overhead. How many people had not made it into the Parthenon? So that's just, there's many other things happening in that story too. And it's a bunch of people who've gone to an art gallery during a tornado. And it's quite an interesting story. And I just thought, I don't have Mary Robinette here to answer questions, but I thought it was a fun thing to read. So thanks so much, Jim and Suzanne. I don't know, are we ready for questions from Belmont Books or from our chat? Or
I got a question for Suzanne.
Yeah.
So, love your story. Reading along, and it presents at the start as sort of a teen. Well, it is a story about teens in high school, and then it gets. I don't know if I've read anything that quite as political as that from you. And so, is it a creature of the current administration, or I mean, I thought it was really great, but wow, it's like you sunk your claws into that society and ripped its guts out. Good for you.
Well, I had just driven across the most of the entire southern United States in a matter of a few days. So I got to see some Oklahoma was kind of scary, I just got to say. A lot of it was beautiful, but yeah. So, but the giant gun sale signs everywhere. I'm like, oh my God, I hope nobody knows I'm from Massachusetts. Oh shit, kill me. Oh, sorry. But yeah, I wanted to say something about, that seemed relevant. A lot of the stuff I write is, I try to say something meaningful in it, but I also try to make it really fun. And Sheila did tell me she wanted something fairly upbeat. So I tried to have it end on sort of a hopeful note, but I was really thinking about the challenges of, even when you are, you think of yourself as a parent as being, or as a, parenting couple, however your family structure is, as being sort of having sort of a one-to-one relationship, your kids to the school and back. But every other parent is also influencing the school or trying to, and their kids, there's a different dynamic for each of them. And there is a huge feedback loop, I think, as a parent, that includes all the other parents in your town. Whether or not you're aware of it, there are always pressures and pushes coming from many directions. And sometimes that affects the decisions that are made. So, I don't know. I was really sick of being in my car, but I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Yeah, I kind of wanted to say something, and I don't think you can really escape the political consequences of technologies and methods to limit what your children learn. Because, there's an ethics there that, your children, you have absolute authority over them, other than, when they're at school. And if you can carry that authority in with them to the classroom, how can that be abused?
Yeah.
a very chilling theme, definitely. I thought it was very, you do handle it with a upbeat theme, that you do feel some positivity in the end, but that doesn't mean that every child in that story is going to have the same.
No. So Sheila, I mean, when we first talked about it, I don't remember you necessarily saying that you were hoping for upbeat, but you did get a lot of upbeat. I mean, did you tell everyone else that it had to be, you were hoping for an upbeat ending? Because the ones, I haven't read them all, but I've read most of them, and none of them are like, oh well, and then a meteor came and killed everyone, and that was the end of the world. So.
No, I did tell everyone. I think you've forgotten. I did tell people that we were looking for. We wanted stories about science and technology, but we wanted to feel like there was a future. There was. Tomorrow, and it doesn't. I said the stories didn't have to be completely happy, but we wanted that at least when you got to the last page, you had a sense that. That life was still worth living, and that you still had that perhaps some of this technology could be, perhaps some of them, maybe not in Suzanne's case, but that some of them could have uses for better, for the good. It's, the stories are not 100, they don't all end completely upbeat. I mean, some of them are they're pretty dark in places. Some of them are just really funny and lighthearted, definitely, but others have more, and I think that was good because that balanced out the anthology. The problem is if I hadn't asked for some stories, you could very easily end up with a lot of sad stories because, right, as I say, readers love stories that are positive and optimistic, and writers love to write tragedies. It's really hard to get everybody on the same. You know, in a magazine, when I'm editing my magazine, Asimov Science Fiction, I can pick and choose from, as I say, I get 800 submissions and I buy about 6 a month, 5 or 6, roughly speaking. Some months I buy 2 and some months I buy 8, but I can pick from all of that and I can get a couple of humorous stories and some to counteract all the very serious stories. But with an anthology, I was only asking 10 authors to write stories for me. So I really wanted to, make sure there was some variation, but without giving too much guidance. I didn't really want to tell everybody what to do, but I did, I didn't want, one person who did talk to me and told me the story would probably be kind of a dark story. That was fine. I knew that ahead of time. So that was okay. Because I knew that not all the stories were going to be like that. Mm. There was one question from Ken Papai in the comments. He asked if I get,
oh yeah.
He says, do you get disappointed story you have to turn around? I'm not quite sure.
Reject.
Stories have to reject. The problem, I could get disappointed, except I have to reject 99% of what I read. So I'm kind of used to that. But I would often like to have, I don't know, it's true that sometimes I'm reading a story and it seems really terrific and then it doesn't go where I think it's going to go and it does kind of not work out the way I thought it might. Usually though, if I'm reading a story and I think it's terrific, it usually holds up all the way to the end. So even if it's not maybe the right story for Asimov's, I know that story will have a future with a different editor. So here's a question for Suzanne and Jim. Somebody says, I'm curious about your writing process. Do you start with the tech or science and then find the characters in the story, or do you start with the characters and weave the tech and science in as you go? You want to start, Jim?
Sure. Well, let's just talk about this story. Once again, I was saying I had been thinking about sex bots, and so I went to the Clarion Writers Workshop many, many years ago. And my guiding light and one of my mentors was Damon Knight. And his advice always was when you're developing when you're developing a story from an idea, so if you're developing a story about sex bots, if you're developing a story about transmitting people to other planets, you don't necessarily want to have it be about the most obvious person. You want to sort of pick someone on the periphery who has a huge stake in the idea. And so again and again and again, he would say, who hurts? And so when you look at, the impact of the technology, you don't want to write necessarily about the guy who invents. You don't want to write about the inventor, because the science fiction ideas are all about the impact of the ideas, the impact of new technology on the way we live. So you want to pick someone who is going to be impacted, and you want to pick someone who's going to be impacted that'll change their lives, hurting maybe, but or at least hurting in the sense that they'll have to readjust themselves to thinking about who they are. And so I would definitely say in this case, I thought, okay, so who is this person that will have something to do with a sex bot and it's not going to be about sex? There's no sex in the story. As a matter of fact, all the sex bot stories I've ever written, there's been no sex in the story. I think that's more interesting to say, well, what happens when the function of this invention isn't necessarily about the thing you think it's going to be about, but about the peripheral, the other things. And so definitely In this case, it was the idea gave way to a story. I'm not sure I have that many stories that start with ideas that are science fiction. If I have a character, often is not, and I've published several stories with Sheila where it's sort of a fantasy or a contemporary fantasy or magic realism. Not often is the character story, and it comes then into the fantastic by way of fantasy as opposed to science fiction.
Yeah, that's, what about you, Suzanne?
My process is completely all over the map. It really depends on the story. Sometimes I hear like the really neat little science thing and I'm like, oh, I gotta do something with that. Like when I found out there's metallic hydrogen, it's like, metallic hydrogen, I gotta do something with that. You know, sometimes it's just that I have this character and this idea of this character and I want to see what awful things I can do to them. But really the wrong way of putting it. But, you know, what kind of situations I could put them in where they're an ordinary person and they're faced with a situation where they have to become something that they didn't think they could be, or, you know, take extraordinary action. You know, I'm very interested in the little guy, by and large, as Sheila can attest. You know, I write a lot of stories with, you know, it's like, I got one where it's a guy driving a garbage truck in space and bus drivers and stuff like that. Because I think that's more interesting. I think we can relate more to people that we see as one of us, you know, one part of humanity, as opposed to this, you know, this brilliant genius with, you know, the Tony Starks of the world. You know, we're much more likely to empathize with, you know, the Captain America kid, everyday Joe, who then has extraordinary things happen to him. In the case of the story, you know, I was sort of, as I had mentioned, I drove 2,600 miles in 5 days from Albuquerque back to Boston. And so I had a lot of time to actually sort of think through. I don't normally outline or plot very far ahead. I have things I know I want in there, and I just sort of improvise till I have something coherent that has the things in it I want. And then I look at it, and then I smooth out all the bumps and make it all, you know, work. But my first draft process is, you know, deeply chaotic and usually results in a pretty serious mess of a draft. But it, you know, there's also a lot of room for inspiration and just sort of ad-libbing things and really getting to know more about your character than you were, you know, they always end up sort of becoming more than you anticipated that they would be, and different than you anticipated them to be. And that process of discovery is really great. So for this story, I had a lot of time to think about it, and I would get to a hotel after driving, you know, 500-600 miles, and I'd get out my little tiny laptop and I'd type up some words and add to it. But in a lot of cases, I just, you know, I kind of think as I type and as I go. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but my process is probably not one that anybody else would advise. But if you are a writer out there and that's the way it works for you, then you're good.
Right. I think both your answers were great. And Suzanne, I love your characters, your everyman kind of characters. And I want to mention something that someone put in the notes very early that you left out of your bio, which is that you win a Hugo Award.
Yeah.
You didn't publish it. So, I have another question here, and it's an interesting question. It's aimed at me, and I actually was talking about this at another event that I did. It says, Sheila, do you think that the science fiction audience is affected by, oh no, I thought it was, I read the question wrong. I thought it was about climate change. Why did I think that? Because it says by the political climate, and I was reading, so never mind. It has nothing to do with what I was talking about at another event. No, in terms of, yes, the science fiction audience of science fiction authors are always affected by contemporary events. And so in this close to any election, I've always seen more and more stories come in that are frantically worried about whatever the situation is at the time, which is not a bad thing, because science fiction stories are imagining, what can go wrong, what are the possibilities. Sometimes I see too many of one particular theme, but I just said during the beginning of the Iraq War, I realized after about a year and a half that I had published 3 stories that had to do with torture. And I just decided that even though they were each different from the other, that was enough. I wasn't going to do any more stories about torture. I was just done with that theme because it wasn't a very comfortable theme anyways. And but actually that was kind of the end. I didn't actually see those stories because it became not as much a part of the political consciousness. I do often see a lot of stories on on abortion, and I see
Sheila, how many are you seeing about COVID?
Oh, I'm seeing a lot about COVID. What I'm really seeing I'm seeing a lot, and I'm saying that I'm not buying any stories right now about COVID. I have always had stories that had plagues in them, and that's not new to science fiction at all. But I definitely am seeing some interesting stories that have to do with isolation. And I actually just bought a story not too long ago from the science fiction writer James Gunn, who said that he was sure that story was, he's 95 years old and very isolated. He was saying he was sure his story had been influenced by the isolation.
Wow.
But his story is not at all about COVID. But yeah, you can't divorce. Science fiction is like any other literature. It really is more about today's world. You may be looking at talking about it in the future, but it's really about today's world. So the perspectives are always from the characters and really the writer's perspectives. I mean, I read an article once that said if you look at Westerns, you can tell the decade it was made by the woman's hairstyle. And I really think that's true, that, science fiction, no matter what we do, projecting into the future, we're still bound by today. We are still responding and reacting to today's events, and authors are consistently doing that and always have. Let me see, I'm going to look at some other questions. Oh, I have.
Can I add something to that real quick? I'm sorry. I just want to say it as well. I think as authors, we're just like everybody else. We're very affected by what's going on around us, and part of being a writer is paying attention to things. So you absorb a lot, and sometimes you absorb too much. And one of the things that really is for me an attraction with short fiction. Is it gives you both an opportunity to sort of process your thoughts about contemporary things in words and in narrative and story. And it also gives you sort of the flip side of that coin, the opportunity to sort of present something that escapes from that. Because I think that's both sides are absolutely critical to have. You have to have stories that make you think about things, but you also have to have stories that give you an opportunity to not think about things.
That's so true. It's interesting with putting this book together. Of course, we always claim science fiction is not predictive, but certain things are predictable especially if you're busy, if you spend a lot of your time thinking about the future. And of course, there is a story in this anthology that has a child at home doing virtual learning, and it's not going really well. And I thought, it's a prescient story, much more than I'm sure the author. It's by Nick Walden. It's called Sparkly Bits, and it's probably much more prescient than he expected at the time that he wrote it, I'm sure.
I loved that story. Yeah. I really did.
I did too. It's really a fun story, and it is it's about a collaborative group of mothers who are raising a child, and there's the birth mother, and then there's the other mothers who have bought into this collaborative financially to raise this child. And like Suzanne says, it's one thing to raise a child and get two people to agree on how the child's going to be raised, but to have like a group of 6 powerful women deciding how you're going to raise a child is very, very complicated. So I know I had a lot of fun putting this book together, and I was really pleased with the stories that came in. I put a lot of thought into who I asked to do the book, because it was my first original anthology, and such a different experience from the magazine, in that I knew that I would almost for certain be buying the story that I was asking the author to write. And so I really wanted to be sure that I was getting the right kind of story. So I was really looking for authors that I knew could write that kind of story. And I really was excited by all the stories that I got in. They really reflect this theme of the book and have great characters, and mostly end on upbeat endings, though not necessarily all of them do. Jim, did you have anything else you wanted to say about your story or about any of the other stories in the book? Have you read other ones, or?
I've read, I think I've only missed 2. I won't mention which ones they are. I think that one of the things that struck me as I was reading was like, oh man, that's a great story. I wrote a story sort of like that, but I think I like this guy better. So sorry, I wish I hadn't read some of those stories, because it made me think about, well, I've been writing for a long time. And so some of this ground I covered a while ago, before the technology really caught up. And so some of the technology here, reflects back on stories I'd written myself previously. But, well, for instance, Rich Larson's story about the uploading people. I mean, I've written a bunch of uploading stories, but I thought this was very good. And it goes to show you that science fiction is not done, even though other people have written science fiction stories about uploading or sex bots or whatever. If people have written that before, the technology changes and the attitudes of the culture change. And so every 20 years, there's a turnover, not only of writers, but of readers and their understanding of where these things fit into their world. So, yeah.
Well, I think one of the things I do in my copious spare time, which I don't have any of, is I'm a moderator of the science fiction room on Absolute Right. And one of the things I do, and a lot of participation has really fallen off because of COVID, and I think people are just sort of stressed, but would be to post a weekly writing prompt for people. And I've been doing that for years and years and years. And you can post a prompt and 10 people will write stories. And even though it's the same prompt, they are 10 completely different stories.
Right.
And so you can have the same technology and the same idea being written at the same point in time of history, but your author is going to come at it from a completely different context based on their own life history, their background, where they are, and they're going to write a completely different story. And all of those different takes have their own merits. So I know there's a question coming up about getting jealous of other people's stories. And I think, as Jim put it, yeah, you read stuff and you're like, damn it, I wish I'd thought of that. Or I was just starting to work on that idea. Now they've ruined it for me because I'm going to be thinking about their idea.
All right.
And I think that's inevitable. But I mean, what's the other choice? Is you never read anything by anybody else ever? Well, that would be, I don't know. I would give up writing before I gave up reading. So.
I know one of the questions Vera mentioned, it's so funny because I was actually just talking about this book at dinner last night with my 18-year-old, which is Isaac Asimov's The Naked Sun. And I've been talking about it a lot because it's, he obviously, for way back in, whatever that book was, I actually looked it up and it was in the 50s, might have been 56. A time when people had stopped coming into face-to-face contact with people, so they did it virtually. But that doesn't mean the idea. But he did it. That doesn't mean we stop. He's the only one ever to do it, because obviously the thinking in the 1950s is completely different from now. And so we take this idea, and I'm sure if I did an anthology of stories about isolation or stories about interacting with virtual reality, I would get 20 different stories that would be very different from each other. And that is certainly true. When I'm doing the magazine, I see that all the time. I have on occasion had things that were coincidentally, unbelievably similar, and I have actually asked authors if they could wait a year before I publish the story. And they always say yes, so that's worked out okay. But I think that there is so much room for, that there's no one way to tell an idea or a story. I mean, it's a good thing that ideas can't be copyrighted.
Right.
Let me see. There are some other kind of questions in here. My friend of mine wanted to know how you guys got started writing. I don't know, do you want to deal with that story or that question? Or
My answer is a little bit grim, but the person who is responsible for the fact that I started writing at all is in fact in the audience of this the chat right now. So it's all her fault. My background is I have a fine arts degree in sculpture, and I was an artist, and my art had a fairly heavy narrative element to it, but it was more art than narrative. And I was working for a tech startup near Boston. I was working 60 to 70 hour work weeks. I had a 4-year-old daughter as a solo parent, and 9/11 happened, and I had put a coworker on flight 11, and a couple of weeks after he died on flight 11, his wife committed suicide. So I was freaking out, be the delicate way of putting it, and there's a long chain of circumstances under how that came about. But I needed a distraction, and my best friend of all time, Lori, I'm assuming this is why she did this to me, says, oh, there's this thing called NaNoWriMo where you write a novel in 30 days. We should do that together. And I think it's like one of those things where you're standing next to the side of the pool with your best friend, and they're like, we'll both jump in on the count of 3. And then you jump in and you're freezing your ass off, and they're still standing on the shore looking at you. Right. So she never wrote anything, but she gets to, as a result, she gets to suffer by reading all my stuff. So in the course of that first NaNoWriMo, I wrote a 110,000 word novel. It was horrible, to say the least. But then I was like, well, no, I can fix this. And that was the point at which the point of no return was, I can fix this. I can make this better. And I've been writing ever since. So that's really the short version of that. So.
Mine is very mundane. I was an English major. I thought I might want to be a writer, but I didn't know how to become a writer. Got a job out of college writing public relations, but I'd be sitting at my desk and writing poems and stories when I wasn't busy. And I went to Clarion, and that changed everything. I quit my job eventually and started writing full time when I was 26. And it was hard. It was wicked hard. It's so far away now. I really can't connect with the pain of breaking in, but the only way I can tell you how bad it was 3 years in to when I first started seriously sending things out, I put 500 rejection slips away. So it wasn't like I was an overnight sensation. And even after I started selling, it would be like one story, then a year, then maybe a couple of stories, then another year. So, but persistence, you just pound until they let you in.
that is the truth. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Clarion is a writing workshop. So, but yeah, it's truth. I tell people not to give up. Well, to do it if it's fun, because if I don't want people, when I reject somebody 40 times, I don't want them to feel like I'm not rejecting them. I'm saying these stories aren't working for me. Again, they could work for someone else. But the main thing is to enjoy doing it. You know, as Suzanne, you know, to find something that is you can put your energy into that's rewarding and yeah, whether or not it reaches an audience. But when it does reach an audience and the audience loves you, which is the case with both of you, then it's great. You know, then that's kind of the jackpot, I think. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions I missed here, or anybody else do either of you have other comments you want to make, or?
What are we working on now? What are you working on now? Did you finish it? Are you writing another Finder? I love Finder, by the way.
Oh yeah. I am theoretically getting the edit letter for the third Finder book back. I'm told by the end of the month, so you know, maybe end of October. Publishing works on its own schedule, so I'll be diving into that. After that, I'm not sure what I'm doing in terms of more Furcus novels. I'd like to write more. I had a contract for 3, and I don't know where that will go from there. Sheila has a novelette of mine that's going to come out soon that's really goofy, but was stupid fun to write. And almost every single character in that novelette, I'm like, you know, I could write a whole nother story about this person.
It's a really fun story, and it's a mystery, and there's just not enough science fictions that are stories that are mysteries, and it's a good mystery too, and it's definitely far future or whatever, not too, but set on a space station, and all kinds of aliens, and definitely what many people think of when they think science fiction, but it is a terrific mystery. Yeah, I don't have any. I'm just doing. I actually put that. I'm almost putting that issue to bed right now. That's the February 2021. 2021 can't come too soon, and so that story will be in that issue. And I was just doing some of the last work on it today. And I was excited. I'm always excited about the next issue, but I was excited working on it. I still have to write the editorial and put that in at the very last minute. And I braved New York City's subway system, went down to the office and to get some information I needed for the issue. So I felt quite ambitious. It was the first time I had taken a subway. I did that about a month ago to get some information I needed. And then I actually went down again yesterday to do some things. But so, and I have to say, everybody had masks on. I was very proud of New York, you know, and they had them on the first time when there wasn't any $50 fine. So that was great. But no, I don't have an anthology right now. But I had a blast doing this one. It's been really great. I hope you all, the people who are here tonight, have a chance to look at the book, and it's really full of wonderful stories. It's got some beautiful art, and the art is by Tatiana Plakova, a Russian artist, and there's a profile of Nancy Kress by Lisa Yazek. So in addition to all it's called 12 Tomorrows because it's 10 stories. Then it's the art and the artist and the profile of a major science fiction author. And in this case, that's Nancy Kress, who is the first time that the series has profiled a number of well-known science fiction authors. And this is the first time that the author is a woman. So I'm quite proud of that too. So I guess it's 8 o'clock. I should thank everyone for having come tonight. I really am glad you all came. I hope you enjoyed our talk. And thank you, Suzanne and Jim, so much for taking time out of your schedule to zoom in and do this.
Well, as I think what I mentioned with before the official Zoom started. The moment this Zoom ends, I am getting in my car and I'm driving basically to Buffalo to an abandoned parking lot and then turning around and coming back again.
Yes. Oh, good luck. And I want to see pictures when you get back.
I will be inundating Twitter with puppy pictures.
Yay.
So if you don't follow me on Twitter, you can just come for the puppy pictures and then, stop following me when I'm done. But
Can't wait. Can't wait. Have a great trip. And give that puppy a kiss for me.
oh yeah,
I've got mine right next to me here.
he's 9 weeks old. He's already 25 pounds.
Oh, wow.
My sleepy.
Oh, look at the dogs. I'm a cat person.
Everyone so much for coming. This has been a wonderful event. I'm so glad that I got to host so I could talk to you all. Good luck, Suzanne, with your puppy.
Thank you.
And I do want to hype up really quick because I forgot to mention at the beginning of this, on the 29th, we were having a lovely discussion about the dynasty. And on the 30th of September, we have an amazing event with Lydia Millay, who was recently nominated for the National Book Award for a children's Bible. I read it. I loved it. It's an amazing book. Everyone should go and listen to her read from it. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Please buy a copy of Entanglements. I put some links in the chat, but you can always head to belmontbooks.com and go to events, click on tonight, and that's where you can find our book. Thank you so much to our readers. You guys are amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
It was fun.
It was.
Was.